Hello and welcome to a very different episode of D-Dubs Plays. For those that are new here, I don't usually do Minecraft content. I'm normally playing City Skylines. However, my niece Ruby has recently started playing and I've promised her that I'll do a tutorial on how to build better in Minecraft. Now this isn't going to be a block by block tutorial on how to build a specific build. Instead, I want to try and teach the underlying principles that you can apply to any build and hopefully make it look a bit better. Now the first step in any build, in my opinion, is to choose your block palette. I think this is often overlooked, but it can be really helpful just to lay out a few blocks, choose the colour schemes and the textures that you want for your build before you even start building. For this build I'm going to be using spruce wood, some stone varieties and stone brick and some white clay. But of course you can choose whichever blocks and textures you think is going to work best for your build. And this leads me into textures. A very easy way to give your build a little bit of variety is to just mix up the textures a little bit. For example, we've got a plain stone wall here, but if we just take the stone brick and randomly pop in a few stone brick into this, then you can see that just that little tweak adds a lot of variety to that wall and makes it look a lot more interesting. So the first step really is choosing a block palette that works well together and has a nice variety of textures that you can mix in together. Next up, let's talk about shape. I think it's very easy, especially when you're a beginner, to just draw a boring rectangle, but it's not an interesting shape, and interesting shapes make for interesting builds. So we're going to tweak this a little bit, and I'm going to start by placing some blocks along the edges just to mark out some distances. Okay, so I've marked out some spacing around the edges of this rectangle. I personally like to work with odd numbers, but that's just a personal preference thing. It doesn't really matter whether you use odd numbers or even numbers. For this build, I've gone with spaces of either 5 or 7 between each of these spruce logs. So now we're just going to add some bits that come out of this rectangle and make it a little bit more interesting. Okay, as you can see, I've just added a few small rectangles along the edges and now we've got a much more interesting shape to work with for our ground floor. So now I'm going to build up the walls and I'm also going to build up those pillars there. And that's going to lead us into the next section, which I'll talk about in a moment. Okay, I've built up all of those walls and I've created a frame around the outside of them using the spruce logs. And the reason that I've done this is because we want to add depth to the build. Now in real life, buildings have a little bit of depth. Roofs overhang, windows and doors are slightly recessed. It's subtle, but it's there. And in Minecraft, the only thing we can do is either ignore the depth or exaggerate the depth. If you ignore the depth, you end up with builds that look very, very flat and boring. So the best approach is to exaggerate that depth. And a great way to do that is to add a frame around the building that is a block further out than the walls. Now other things that we can do is make sure that our doors are set back, and also we use panes of glass instead of glass blocks for the windows. That just adds a little bit of extra depth, and we'll add some more depth when we come to the detailing phase a little bit later on. For now though, we need to look at building a second floor, and just as we did with the first floor, we want to make an interesting shape, but we want to make the shape a little bit different on the second floor. That's going to add a little bit of variety to the build, and you'll see what I mean when we're done. Okay, so this time the shape's a little bit more simple, but we're going to have lots of roofs that are going to merge into this second floor, so that's going to keep it looking interesting. Now I'm going to build this up and add the frames, and I'll be back with you in a moment. Okay, I've got the second floor built up. I haven't added any texture to the walls yet. There's no windows. We haven't got any roofs on, but we can already see that it's looking a little bit more interesting than just a plain oblong wood. It's going to look even better when we've got some roofs on here, so let me just add some of those and I'll come back to you in a moment. Okay, I've added the roofs and I've also changed the walls on the second floor upwards to white concrete. Adding a different texture to the second floor is a nice easy way to add a little bit of variety and interest to your build. Now if you're looking at these roofs and thinking they look way too complicated, let me assure you they're not as complicated as they look. I've started off by doing the little extra bits that we put on the ground floor and adding roofs to those. This roof pattern's quite simple. It's a stair, an upside down stair and a full block, and then just repeat. So nice and simple really. I've done the same thing on this bit here, and then around the back I've just done a nice shallow roof with half slabs. At this end I've used the same tall roof pattern on the second floor, and then at the other end I've added a little bit of interest by just changing the orientation here. And the way that I chose where to start that was just by looking at where my frame was on the second floor here. And then over at this part here I've just done very similar, but obviously this section is not as wide as the main build, so it gives a bit more variety to the roof pattern there. And here again I've done exactly the same thing, where I've just used the frame to decide where to put that little bit that sticks out and create a little bit more variety in the roof. Roofs can look almost flat if you don't put a little bit of variety in them, so it's always good to just add a little bit here and there that changes orientation, just to give it a little bit more interest. Now at the moment the walls are looking very plain, so let's add some windows. I'll be back in a moment. Okay, so I've added the windows and I've also textured the walls on the ground floor, and you can see already it's looking quite interesting. All we've done is we've started with an interesting block palette and a variety of textures. We've created an interesting shape and we've added a little bit of depth, but there's still more that we can do to this. The next step is to add some detailing. Now there's lots of details that we can add. For example, we could create a nice little flower bed in front of one of our windows with some trapdoors and some podzol. Just like that, and we can just pop a couple of flowers in there. We can also add some shutters to the windows with some trapdoors. And then in spaces like this we can add some beams using the fences. And as you can see, already just this little area is looking much more interesting. It's got a little bit more depth, a little bit more character. So I'm going to go around and add some details to the rest of the walls, and I'll be back with you in a moment. Okay, we've added lots of detail around the build now, and as you saw, it's all just simple stuff like trapdoors, fences, upside down stairs, but it really adds a lot of interest to the build and makes it feel much more interesting and intricate. And we're almost done now. The last step is to integrate the build into the landscape. At the moment it just kind of looks like it's plopped on top of the landscape. It doesn't feel like it really belongs here. And what we want to do is make it feel like it's a part of the world. Now if we come down here we can see that I've built this on the highest point and I've let it overhang in places, and the reason for that is that it gives us a little bit of space to blend the build into the landscape, and we're going to use a lot of the cobblestone variants to do this. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a bit of a border around it with cobblestone, like so, and then I'm going to add in some of the variants here and there, put a bit of mossy here, we'll add some steps and slabs, and we'll just kind of try and blend this into the landscape a little bit. And we want it to be quite uneven, we don't want it to be too uniform. We're trying to give it a kind of natural look. So just vary up these blocks a bit. And then we can throw in some stone buttons here and there just to give it a little bit more variation. Then we can just add in the occasional shrub and plant like this. and that kind of makes the whole thing feel like it's blended into the landscape a bit more. So I'm just going to go round and finish this off around the rest of the build, and I'll be back with you in a moment. Okay, I'm done, and as you can see, the cobblestone that I've added around the base of the house there just really makes it feel like it belongs in the world, helps it blend into the landscape a bit. So let's recap what we've gone over today. Number one, start with an interesting block palette, colours that work well together, textures that work well together, and that'll provide a good foundation for you to start from. Number two, keep the shapes interesting. A plain old square or oblong can work if it's done well, but it's a lot harder to make those shapes look interesting. Much easier to just add a little bit of interest to the shape right from the beginning. Number three, put lots of depth in your builds. It's very easy to make a build look all too flat in Minecraft, but just finding ways to add bits of depth to the build can really help bring it to life and make it feel more interesting. Number four, add lots of detail. The details can be quite simple things like trapdoors and fences, but they really do help make the building look a lot more interesting. And number five, blend it into the landscape, make it feel like it belongs in the world. Hopefully you've picked up something useful from this tutorial. As I said at the beginning, I don't usually do Minecraft content, but if you'd like to see more content like this, then please do jump down in the comments and let me know. And don't forget to hit that like and subscribe buttons. And I will catch you in the next one.